My name is Ben Allen. I'm the Head of Agriculture and Land Management at the Institute for European Environmental Policy. I'm going to talk briefly about governance needs and gaps for a sustainable circular bioeconomy. One of the challenges with the circular bioeconomy is there are many different dimensions to govern. We have different actors in a supply or value chain, from primary producers, from manufacturers, processors, as well as consumers, those that use bioeconomy products and those that use and take value in recreation within the bioenvironment, whether that's rural tourism or other forms of recreation. The bioeconomy operates across different geographies at a regional, local, sometimes even farm level or forest level context, all the way through to international supply chains, such as through international commodity markets or products and different primary resources. There are also a variety of different sectors, policies and objectives which drive the bioeconomy and the circular bioeconomy. And these can relate to things like energy, materials, food, but also climate, biodiversity objectives, water objectives that we are trying to address through a more sustainable bioeconomy and that transition away from the fossil and mineral resources. In terms of resources themselves, those also affect how we govern and what it is that we need to govern. There are things such as wastes, particularly when we talk about the circular bioeconomy, the recovery of nutrients, materials, the recycling of componentry or different fibers and products, but also primary materials, those purposely grown, those that arise on land, secondary materials from processing, etc. And depending on where those fall and how they're treated in legislation means the way we govern them and need to govern them might be different. And finally, we've got that aspect of production and consumption, those two halves of our supply value chains. And that will become apparent as to why consumption is a particularly big challenge in the bioeconomy and the circular bioeconomy, and the importance of establishing governance mechanisms there, as we see in the next slides. To illustrate with one example of how these supply and value chains require governance at different levels, we can look at the European food supply chain. We see here that we've got input industry, farmers, food and drink manufacturers, wholesale suppliers, retail and services, and ultimately a huge body of consumers. And that's a lot of different actors making different decisions on different bases and reacting to different drivers, different governance mechanisms. And actually, when we look at this in a geographical context, this could be across an entire planet. It could be within a single farm, it could be within a single region or within a country, etc. So the governance mechanisms necessary will need to cover a large suite of different intervention points. And the dotted lines you see here are where we see the importance of consumption and governing consumption, or at least helping consumers be part of the process when it comes to sustainable circular bioeconomy supply chains. One of the main challenges, and why I highlight consumption so much in the governance context, is that throughout the process of a transition to a circular bioeconomy, really we're looking to change from material consumption, from fossil and mineral resources, to those which are bio-based. And to do that, replacing it on a one-to-one basis would be an enormous challenge. The diagram here on the right shows the total material consumption per year in the EU, something like 6 trillion tons, versus the total amount of biomass that is produced on agriculture and forestry land, and a smaller amount which is even harvested. So it's very necessary to address the consumption angle, reduce our material footprint and consumption patterns, and think about the different governance mechanisms necessary to do that in order to get a sustainable bioeconomy that works and doesn't put in additional resource constraints into the system. Finally, some examples of governance for inspiration. It's actually quite challenging to find very specific examples of where circular bioeconomy is governed. I think there's a lot of inspiration that we can draw from things like land use strategies that we have in different countries. And they take a view across different drivers, different needs, and look at the resource base. And that's a crucial element for the bioeconomy, is looking at that resource base and seeing how that is being used, what the demands and drivers on that resource is, and how to govern that at that level, so there can be a more strategic and a more inclusive way of looking at bioresources and how they materialize then into the economy. We've got other examples like fair trade, governance of how products meet certain standards across supply chains in the international context, the EU FLEGT facility, forest law enforcement, how we enforce different standards, different levels of legal compliance within different countries, and again through supply chains. United Nations Conference on Climate Change, addressing how we think globally and regionally about addressing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing carbon sinks, how we account for those as well. That can give us clues as to how to govern and monitor what is happening within different supply and value chains. And also we can draw inspiration from relatively detailed or local level initiatives where we see things such as decision support mechanisms on how specific objectives relating to the bioeconomy can be addressed and encouraged, what those different needs are, and how those gaps at a smaller scale are being filled, and perhaps look at lessons from those and scale those up. A lot of work has been done with the European Network for Rural Development, for example, in the context of farming and agriculture. But crucially, governance for the bioeconomy, the circular bioeconomy, needs to be one of inclusivity, particularly with those actors that are involved in the production and supply of biomass, and in those who consume it, and those that consume and use the bioeconomy as a whole. Thank you.